Okay. That's better. Alrighty. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk about UPS units. For starters, what is UPS? What am I talking about? In the computer world, we have equipment that keeps our stuff safe, right? The most common thing people tend to have inside of their homes are surge suppressors, right? And what that gives you is a small bar, outlets, you can plug your stuff into. And then if something weird happens out on the power grid, where the electricity goes up in voltage, right? It goes over what's the rating for your area. In the United States, that voltage is 120 volts, right? That's line voltage. Now, if it gets too high, then it ends up helping cut some of that off. That's what's really common, right? But what happens if the power goes out, right? Well, the surge strip doesn't do anything. Your stuff just gets shut off. And that's where a UPS, or an uninterruptible power supply, comes in handy. There are a couple different kinds, and they all are a variety of prices. So, let's get into it. Let's see if I find my mouse. Alright. So, we've got 3 different kinds that you'll find wandering out in the wild, right? And you may wonder, well, there's a couple different kinds, so what gives, right? Well, there's several different things that the different kinds can have. There are standby UPS units, line interactive units, and double conversion units. I'm going to tell you right now, the double conversion units are generally, obviously, the most expensive and the least common. Those are the kinds you would find in a data center, or someone who's trying to protect some super sensitive stuff you don't want to mess around, nothing crazy with. A standby, right? We got all these different items here, right? That are, whether it supports it, or it interacts with it, or it doesn't, right? So, surge, right? At the most basic level, these all behave as a surge suppressor, right? And it's no different than the suppressors that you would find in like Walmart, right? But everything above surge is something that you'll only find on a UPS unit. And in the case of blackout protection, power goes completely out, then you will notice that your stuff will stay on, right? The UPS unit will intervene because it'll switch to battery. Now, the nice thing about surge suppressors is they're really, really fast, right? So fast, even so, that they interact within a couple milliseconds of things getting weird, right? And that comes in really handy. Now, on the cheapest of models, you'll find that, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be a UPS unit. And then another item that you'll see here that the cheaper option does. So I have a price down here, right? So these are just general ideas of what one of these units will cost. And like the cheapest ones start at like $55, right? A brownout is when the voltage dips below a certain voltage that it intervenes, right? And what that looks like is it just switches completely over to battery and just ignores the line voltage. But you may ask me, well, why is under voltage its own thing if brownout sounds an awful like that? Well, there's a reason for that. And that's because a line interactive unit, which starts kind of closer to, like, I'd say the cheapest you can get a line interactive one for is around $150. I put $200 in here plus. But more or less that's what you're on, right? And the undervoltage protection, as opposed to being brownout, undervoltage means that the unit interacts directly with the voltage that's coming in. So instead of switching completely over to battery and running on battery, it may just boost the voltage to get it up to 120 volts if you're in the US, or 230 volts if you're in the United Kingdom. Overvoltage protection is another instance of sounding very similar to surge protection, right? And again, they're similar, but it's the way that the unit interacts with what goes on, right? Overvoltage protection means that the UPS will intervene. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to switch to battery, though. Overvoltage means that it may just redirect some of that surge back out through ground, where it can't harm anything, and not use the batteries. In the case of overvoltage protection, the standby units don't really do anything with that. They have their certain level of suppression, and this is where the line interactive ones tend to stand out a little bit more, which is why when you look at what you'll find at like a big box store, that they're actually the more common that you'll come across. The double conversion ones do have some additional protection, and this is more of protection against a certain waveform disruption. This is where things get a little complicated. I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but line noise, frequency variation, and harmonic distortion. These are very waveform specific problems that you will see that I'm not going to cover. And these units start at like $600 plus. They're incredibly expensive, and it's just simply what it is, right? So, with that in mind, I'm going to switch us over to... actually, before I do that, do you have any questions? Does any of that make sense to anyone? Because if it doesn't, I could attempt to clarify. Okay. I'm fully aware that pictures would help with talking about something like this, but I simply don't have any. I have a picture that we're going to use, but it's something that will be for a little later. But yeah, so pretty much the nice thing to be able to tell with what kind you're looking at is to just take the time to read the description, because almost every unit you're looking at, you're going to see it'll have some phrasing on it as to what kind it is. But I mean, let's face it, if you're paying the big bucks, $600 plus, $1,000, it's almost guaranteed to be a double conversion. The only time it would be a line interactive at that price point is if it was just a massive battery bank, that it was just a really long runtime unit, as opposed to one that handles the more disturbances one could expect to see on the electrical grid. So, that leads me into our topic of sizing. Let's scoot this stuff over here so you can see what we're doing. Okay, that's better. Almost. I lied, I'm in the way now. Yeah. That's alright. I did promise that tonight we are actually going to work on one. So what that's going to look like is a CyberPower 1500 AVR. That is a unit that has a maximum wattage. So at full load, the most that you can plug into this would be 900 running watts, right? And that's everything. In a perfect world, that would be the most power that your equipment could pull at any one given point in time. If you ever plug too much stuff into a UPS unit, what'll happen is that it'll trip the internal breaker, and then everything shuts off. So you always want to make sure that you get the appropriate UPS for what you're going to plug into it. So we kind of want to look at that, right? What makes any kind of sense? So in the example we're playing with, it's got a total of 12 outlets on it. It's got 6 outlets that are on battery and 6 outlets that are surge only, which means if the power goes out, only half of them are going to supply power when the power goes poof. If you're only planning on plugging 6 things in, then you don't have a problem with that. But if you need to have more things run on battery, then you need to consider the idea of a larger unit, right? Now, sizing a unit comes to what you plan on plugging into it, right? At maximum capacity, 900 watts, this UPS will run for 3 minutes. And then the batteries die. So, if you had a lot of stuff plugged in, well, 3 minutes isn't a very long runtime, so you would hope that whatever you have plugged into it can be shut off in that amount of time. Now, that sounds like a heck of a race against time. So maybe you don't want to get that unit if you're really approaching that number, right? At half capacity, 450 watts, you get 12 minutes, which is fairly reasonable, right? Because if your power goes blip, it just quickly shuts off and back on. It's like less than 30 seconds, right? Either of these are going to be fine. But if you have a couple minutes worth of downtime, I think having the couple extra minutes here helps significantly. But how do we come up to this number, right? How do I know, looking at these numbers, what does that mean, right? On the back of every piece of equipment, where the power label is, right? So if you look at the power brick on your laptop, right, you're going to see a wattage rating or an amperage rating. And the way you figure out what kind of unit you go for is based on what you're plugging in, right? So I have here, come on, children. Ah! All right, rock and roll. Some different power ratings that I've gotten off of some stuff, right? So if you were to Google and ask the lovely internet what your computer runs, if it's a pre-built computer, right, you may find it doesn't draw a whole lot, and that's fine. I looked at a mini PC, and when it's going full throttle, using somewhere between 35 and 50 watts, right? And a mid-tower computer, about 125. The nice thing is that if it's a pre-built computer, all you have to do is look at the sticker rating, and you can see the maximum amount of power that it could pull, right? Now, with that, say you built your computer, right? Well, if you wanted to be absolutely certain that it couldn't pull any more than what's rated, you could technically use the rating of your power supply as the theoretical maximum of what it would pull, right? So you can get a power supply that pulls up to 750 watt, right? Well, if we take a look at our numbers over here, the computer by itself with nothing else connected, so that's no monitor, right, or speakers or other accessories, would be okay, right? But realistically speaking, you're never going to want to buy a power supply and redline it, right? So that's why we take a look at the accessories. With our accessories, we can just do some simple math to figure out what we have, right? So if we have a custom-made computer with a motherboard that's more high-end, that may pull 80 watts, right? A standard mechanical hard drive is usually somewhere between 9 and 10 watts. SSDs actually pull very little wattage, which is nice. So if your computer actually doesn't even have a hard drive or it just runs on SSDs, you'll actually get more runtime because they don't pull that much power, which in turn is handy. So you may find that if you've got a high-end computer, that you have a nice CPU, right? And all these ratings are available online, right? So if you just look up the model of your processor, and it'll tell you what the rated wattage is for it. So if we cook all this up here and add it all together, right? So we have a nice computer. It's got one hard drive and SSD. Obviously, we have cooling, right? Now, what if we have standard cooling versus fancy cooling? Well, just a simple fan between 2 and 4 watt, right? It's nothing crazy. But if you've got liquid cooling in your computer, right? Well, those are running pumps, right? And the pump is absolutely going to use more wattage. In this case, the example that I found runs about 80 watt, right? Now, we're going to say that our example here does not have liquid cooling, so I'm going to pull that number out of there. And let's say that our computer has 2 case fans, right? And we've got more than one monitor. we got this, right? So let's say we've got 2 monitors, a nice high-end graphics card, right? In this example, I grabbed the power rating out of a 3000 series NVIDIA card. Runs about 200 watt. Now, that's the maximum that that card can pull, right? So if you're not actively in a game, right, that card's not going to be running at full throttle, ready to go the entire time. But the idea here is that you want to rate your UPS for if your computer was at 3/4 or, full throttle, more or less. Because if your power blips and you're in the middle of an intense game where there's a lot going on, there's a lot going on the screen, the graphics card's pushing really hard, or you're in VR, or hey, you might be streaming. You don't know. Life happens. You want to make sure that you don't pull more power than what your unit can put out, or the lights are going to go out, and no one likes it when that happens, right? So with that, we have that fancy graphics card, and we'll say we have an external hard drive, right? Something that we just back our stuff up to. So if we add all that together with the sum function, because Excel, I'm an Excel nerd, that's a thing I do on the internet, we will see that if we add all that up, that this is the maximum of all these things can pull, then the computer with its monitors will pull just shy of 500 watt. Now, I'm not accounting for the little bit of power that the keyboard's going to use, the mouse is going to use, if you have a webcam connected, right? All of these things have wattage, and they all use less than a watt, right? If you wanted to, you could just say for miscellaneous power, we can just guesstimate maybe another 10, right? Just for the accessories that are plugged into like the USB ports and things like that. So that gives us a nice, easy number to play with. And now we can say that our computer pulls slightly over 500 watt, right? So now if we scoot back over to what this thing's rated for, right? The one that we have for our example this evening. You're going to see that we only kind of have 2 numbers to look at here, and half capacity of the UPS is 450 watt. So we already know right out of the gate, that we're not going to get a full 12 minutes, right? We're already slightly over what half is. So we can expect maybe somewhere between 5 and 6 minutes, right? And for a computer that's hooked up to the UPS, well, there's something really nice about UPS units, and that's that they can talk with the computer. Just like a laptop, right? You slap your laptop down on the table, and you're typing. You're going ham, and you hear, oh goodness, someone's at the door. You're not going to stop typing. What are you going to do? You're going to unplug the laptop, and you're going to run over to the door because you're in the zone. Well, you got a battery, right? And what happens? The laptop doesn't shut off. It just keeps running because it's switched over. Now, in a laptop, that's not a UPS. That's just the way it's designed, and it has a battery, right? Same thing happens. Oh, thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate that. The UPS unit is going to switch over seamlessly, right? And it's fast. It's really fast. This is the switching time on this UPS unit. Within 4 milliseconds, it dumps the clutch and switches to the batteries. Or it intervenes, right? Because like I said, back over here, a middle-of-the-road UPS, right, has the overvoltage and undervoltage protection, not necessarily meaning that it's going to switch the battery. It may simply intervene and dump some of that voltage out to ground, or it may boost it with the batteries and not fully switch, which gives you more runtime and a little bit better protection for the most part. Naturally, when you buy a cheaper unit, you're going to get cheaper stuff, right? And you want to match your rating, right? So, with that, I'm going to pull up our picture here, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we're working with here. So, we're going to scoot this over here. Boop. So, on the back of this unit, they did something convenient for us, right? They added some colors. Now, granted, where is this going to be sitting? It's going to be sitting on your floor, right? What's on the floor? Not a lot of light, right? So, I recommend a flashlight if you're ever going to be wandering around under there plugging stuff in and unplugging stuff, because it's easy to mix up the surge plus battery outlets with the surge outlets. Now this one makes it fairly straightforward. They don't mix them. Left side is surge and battery, and right side is surge only. So say you had a lamp or your printer, right? You don't want to plug the printer into the battery and surge, especially if it's a laser printer. Those suckers pull so much power. If it switched to battery, it would most certainly trip, right? And as I had mentioned, there's a reset breaker on these. And in this particular unit, there's this dude just chilling right here in the middle, right? He goes to town. He looks pretty good. And it just pops out. It doesn't light up or anything. So, we got some stuff here on the top, right? Now, as I mentioned, the unit can talk with your computer, right? Well, this particular unit has two options for interacting with your computer. You can either plug it in with a USB cable, which is by far the most common and what I would recommend right here, or there's a serial connection. Now, the serial connection exists on these units for kind of two reasons. First reason, if you're working with something that I'm not necessarily going to say is older, but I'm going to say something that's got compatibility for older equipment, like a server blade, right? So that's a long, thin computer that runs day and night, does its job, and people don't really interact with it, right? So you can imagine, like, say the server for like Facebook, for example, right? That guy just runs, it's left unattended, but you may have more than one thing also plugged into the UPS unit. Well, you can actually plug this USB into the first blade, and you can use the serial port with a serial adapter, or if you have a serial cable, to connect to the serial port on your device. Now, naturally, most computers, you're not going to find a DB9, that's what this is, DB9 serial connector. So you can either get yourself a USB and use that, or you can get an add-on card. But for the most part, people don't really use them, right? And then there's a couple extras over here that most people don't tend to use. I don't. It's just how it is. There's coax and network filtering, right? So what these are designed to do is if you got voltage on the line where it doesn't belong, like in the case of coax, right? You should never have really active voltage on a coax cable. That's like the cable that would go in the back of your modem or screw into the back of a cable box, because it uses modulated signal to move itself across. But there should never be a positive voltage here, because generally it fries equipment. And that's not great if you have active voltage coming in on that. It can fry your equipment. I actually had a coworker that had active voltage on their coax line that came into their house and plugged into the back of their modem. Well, lucky for them, they rented their equipment. And about every 3 to 4 months, their modem would die. And then the ISP would give them a new one. They weren't responsible for the equipment because it was a rental. And they had mentioned several times, there's a problem. There's voltage on the line. But they simply didn't fix it. So, new piece of equipment every once in a while, right? With something like this, it could help offload the voltage. I don't know to what degree. I don't use this part of the UPS unit myself. So I would absolutely encourage you, if you want to know more about that, do a little bit of research. But I know that that's at least what it's for. And the same thing with the network jacks, that if you were to get a spike in voltage or something that just shouldn't be there for the most part, this is a nice pass-through on the back here. One more we're going to talk about here. Wiring fault. So, in America, we've got, on a standard US outlet, we've got 3 wires. You've got your ground, you've got your hot, and your neutral. In most cases, hot's black, neutral's white, and ground is bare copper. Usually there's no insulation on ground. And those have to be wired the correct way on your outlet for things that have an appropriate direction. Like if you have a lamp, right, a really dumb lamp that you just found in the closet somewhere, it more than likely has a outlet with 2 prongs, and they're the same exact size, which means you could plug it in face up, flip it, or face down, which means it doesn't care what side the hot's on and what side the neutral's on. It doesn't have a 3rd prong for ground, so it can go in one way or the other. On a UPS unit, it absolutely has to be wired correctly, and it can only be plugged into the outlet one way. Hot has to be where hot is, ground has to be where ground is, right? and neutral has to be where neutral is, right? All three have to coincide in being in the right place. So why there's a light here is if something's backwards. Usually if this wiring fault light comes on, it's either an open ground or the hot and neutral are reversed in the outlet. And that's no good. If you do have a wiring fault, speak to a licensed electrician and they can help you sort out the issue. It's very important not to mess with that kind of stuff. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend talking with someone who is. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the back, right? We've got a total, I said 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. And they even gave the space there for big power bricks. Because usually if you have an external hard drive, usually the adapters are kind of big, which is nice. They kind of spaced that one out a little bit so you can actually plug stuff in. Okay. So now we got that cooking. I'm going to switch to the bench and we're going to service one. Because mine has got dead batteries in it. I had the power blank and everything that was plugged into mine turned off. So that's a fantastic way to know that the batteries aren't good anymore. Generally speaking, when it comes to the batteries in their life, right? Most of the upper or like the mid-level UPS units and more expensive have user serviceable batteries. Check your manual, or if there's not a manual included in the box, there is the instructions that are on the website where you can grab the data sheet, which explains to you what kind of batteries it takes and how to appropriately replace them, because all of them have their own kind of setup. Now, in the case of this specific unit, this uses lead acid batteries. So there's 2 batteries in here. They're both 12 volt and they're 9 amp. Both of those batteries put together equate to a maximum of 900 watts output. So, with that, let's get to it here. Switch scenes. Now, we have with us here, thankfully, something that's fairly straightforward to take apart. We have our unit right here, right? And I don't think I can stand this up, but let's see here. On the face, see if I can get this in view here for you folks. Yes, I can. Very carefully. There we go. So the power button's on the top, and then there's a display button and a mute button. When these units switch to battery, they beep to let you know that one of 2 things has happened. The UPS is intervened, or it's unplugged. That also is the same thing as if you actually trip a breaker, or if for some reason that this unit's plugged into a GFCI outlet that has its own ability to trip, in addition to the circuit that's built into this, right? So, before I get to the wiring fault thing, I do want to mention, if the light on the back of the unit comes on, stating that there's a wiring fault, right? The little red LED on the bottom here. There's a way you can check your outlet yourself safely. This is one that is for the United States voltage. This is 120 volts. And it will tell you, based on 3 LEDs on the back, what your wiring looks like and if it's correct. Now the cool thing about these is that if you have an outlet that you think is GFCI, well, you can check it and you can actually trip it on demand. There's a little button here on this, and if you click it and you plug this into an outlet, if there's a GFCI, and what I mean by that is in, like, say, your bathroom, right? Any new construction in the US will have GFCI outlets in the bathroom. And there's a little button, and if you click it, it removes the power from the outlet. Well, what this does is it leaks a little bit of voltage across the rails, causing it to trip. That's actually a fantastic way to check to see if the outlets in your bathroom actually function correctly, is grab one of these, click the button, and then the power disappears and the lights go out. If my outlet is wired correctly, there's a little diagram on here letting you know how what the different lights mean. And specifically on this unit, there's little letters and numbers on here. So red is R, Y1 is for yellow 1, which is this one in the center. And then we've got Y2 or yellow 2, which is the one on the right. If this outlet is wired correctly, the Y1 and Y2 will light up and the red light will stay off. So I'm going to grab my power here. I'm going to push it in there. And we have 2 yellow lights, which means my outlet is wired correctly. Now, I would showcase that the GFCI, this is actually GFCI strip, but I don't want to click the button, because if I do, I'm going to lose power to my laptop. I don't want to do that. But trust me on this one, if I click that, the lights are going to go out. I don't want to do that. If something was wrong, right? If the R came on, that could mean that the hot and ground are reversed, or that the hot and neutral is reversed, which are bad configurations. That means things are simply not where they belong. And again, you should speak to a licensed electrician to figure out what the problem's all about, right? You can feel free to do your research, but I would recommend that this is incredibly unfriendly voltage. You don't want to mess around with alternating current, right? Speak to a professional. This is a fantastic way to just check it yourself. These are also awesome too if you are in the market for buying a home. Because if you're buying a home, you probably want to make sure that the wiring is wired appropriately in your house. This is a fantastic tool for that. Because when you get to do a tour of the house, you can pop this dude in an outlet and you can check right there in 2 seconds whether the outlets are wired right. Because if they're not, that could be a conversation you have with the folks who are selling you that house. There could be a reason for it. There might not be. The previous owner might not even have known. Because all in all, if you have a device that doesn't have that grounding problem, which I'm referring to this one, then they may actually never have noticed that a particular outlet could be miswired in their house. Which is a fantastic way. This is like $10, $15, this little dude. They're cheap. You toss it in a drawer. Just don't lose it. And you can easily figure out what you got going on. Right? So, as I'd mentioned, this dude has a grounding prong on it. So it'll only go in the outlet one way. And in the case of this particular unit, if I were to plug it in, the unit's going to turn on, and it's going to behave like it works until the power goes out. So, we got to change batteries. So, on this particular Cyber Power UPS, there are 2 screws that hold the face on. I checked this in the data sheet beforehand. One here, and one here. So I'm going to take these 2 screws out, and then the face lifts up and pulls back. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to very cautiously not lose my screws. I might lose a couple of marbles, but I ain't losing screws. Okay. Now I'm going to grab the face, pull back. Okay. So now, obviously, I don't have this plugged into the wall. And before you do any kind of servicing in one of these units, make sure to unplug it. I know mine's unplugged because it's on a bench and it's been cleaned up and it's not hiding under a dirty, dark desk. For certain. Okay, so the display is this little ribbon cable. So with these, you just pull back. And something that's nice about these ribbon cables is they actually are oriented. There's little notches that are on top of the cable here, and the slot itself actually is notched. So if you put this down and you panic because you don't know which way that cable came off, don't worry, it only plugs in one way. There's a saying one of my professors told me, is that there's no grunting in IT. So if something doesn't feel like it's fitting in the appropriate socket, don't force it. You might have something backwards. Same thing goes with RAM. RAM's always oriented. It only goes in one way. Again, don't force it. You might cause yourself a bad time. Okay. Okay, so it looks like we've got another bracket in the way I have to take out here, which I'm going to show you, attempt to show you. So the bottom battery is held in place by just the front cover, and the top battery is held in place with this bracket. So it's 2 more screws. and then we have access to both batteries. Now, something that you have to be super mindful of when taking apart a UPS is the placement for the batteries and the way it's wired in the unit. Every battery has a polarity, right? Everybody's super familiar with a AA battery. What's a AA battery? You have your positive end, right, and your negative end. On the batteries, usually the positive is indicated by a plus symbol. Well, like this one, right? UPS batteries have the same thing. They have a polarity on them. Pretty much every battery has a polarity on them. It's just the way that it's marked that makes the difference. In our example, the replacement batteries do have the symbols on them. For positive for red, and negative, or the minus symbol for the negative, right? And they are actually colored. Positive is red. Now, you may have noticed there in frame, if you had a quick enough eye, I have a cable in here that's not either of those two colors. It's yellow. So, what that means is that the batteries are joined together. So, the positive wire comes down, goes into the top battery, and then the negative of the top battery goes into the positive of the lower battery. And then the negative, which is on the other side here, plugs back into the UPS unit. That means that these batteries are wired in what's called serial. The batteries are joined together. And what that does is it doubles the voltage of the battery. It's called a pack at that point. So instead of it being two 12-volt batteries at 9 amps, you now have 24 volts. Come on, I don't want to strip it. Don't do that. There we go. Okay, fantastic. Yes, don't get stuck. That would be bad. Yes. Transfer that, come back to me, children. Battery configuration, that's right. So we have 24 volts then, and this is in series, so that's still 9 amps. If it was in parallel, where red to red and negative to negative were connected, then you would have still 12 volts, but you double the amperage. That's fun electrical math. What a time. Okay, so I already could tell, and you can witness, that the negative from the upper battery goes to the positive on this one. Keep that in mind. Because if I plug it in wrong, we're going to get sparks. I'm not looking to send myself to the moon this evening. Now, these type of UPS units, there's nothing too crazy holding these in here. You just got to pull them back. They're spade connectors. Well, good evening, Rig City Clam. City Slam. I can't read usernames, I swear. Words work in my brain sometimes. Okay, yes, of course. You would have thought I would have maybe have opened this and prepped it to make sure these weren't too tight before stream, but no. No, someone who was organized would do that. There we go. Okay, that one's off. And then rotate that up. Slide our friend out here. Okay. All right. First battery's out. So the first thing I want to look at here, knowing that I'm going to grab some gloves. Hold on a moment. Now, normally I would not put on gloves when working on one of these.
But there's a reason that I decided I want gloves, or at least in this case, a glove. It's not too uncommon to see one of these batteries swell when they've been in a unit for a while. Now, in the case of this particular unit, this battery is cracked a little bit on the bottom, which means that the lead acid, it's not leaking, but that means that at least it's technically no longer contained to the battery. Now, it does appear that nothing has leaked out. But that's okay. We've got gloves on anyway. I'm actually going to flip that battery and put the open end facing up so we don't leak acid all over my bench. And then I'm going to grab out the other battery. We're going to slide that out after I disconnect the negative lead. Not there all that hard at all, which is nice. Okay. So before I go sliding that battery out, I actually would like to put the new one in. Out of personal preference, I like to do one battery at a time. I don't like to remove more than one at a time, especially if you're packing a UPS that has multiple batteries in it, more than two, right? So if you've got a UPS that has 4 batteries in it, it more than likely is wired in a very specific way. You have to be really careful that you keep track of where each wire goes. Because if you miswire it, you're going to cause yourself some troubles. And you really don't want to do that. I know I don't want to do that. That would be a poor decision on my part to accidentally miswire the unit. Okay, so now I've got that. Got that one connected. Pull that one out. We'll check this one to see if it's, salty. It's not cracked on the bottom, so this one actually looks okay. It's not leaking, and it's not bulged. So usually when the UPS batteries go bad, where they just give up, if they bulge, sometimes they give off an odor, and it smells an awful lot like rotten eggs. So if you smell rotten eggs, that could be a bad battery, or a battery that's about to go bad. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, battery number 2. Now, we're going to very carefully, like I had mentioned, these are wired in series. Say it with me. The positive of the upper battery goes to, the negative of the upper battery goes to negative. Actually, that's not right. No, I was right. It goes to the right. Negative from top, positive to bottom, positive to the UPS. See, I looked away for a second. Even I'm questioning myself. Which is why I encourage you. Make some markings, what you can, and then you'll be okay. Very rarely will you find a UPS that actually comes in a configuration where you're putting the batteries in parallel, where a red and a red were connected to each other. Almost always they tend to be in series, where negative and positive are joining together. It's by far one of the most common configurations. One. There we go, that's better. Okay, so that guy on there. Now it's time to plug our face back in. Just like any protogen, it's good to make sure your face is plugged in. Okay, notches lined up. That looks good. I got my bracket back on. Positive and comes in from the top of the unit. Negative goes to the positive of the lower battery, and then it grounds out on the bottom of the unit. Means we're right. Now comes the fun part, getting this to close. Something that's important about when you order replacement batteries is that you get the same amperage, because usually the form factor is the same. If you have a UPS that has a 7 amp battery, or sometimes even smaller than that, if you try to think, hey, I'll just put a bigger battery in it. No, you're not going to do that. And you want to know why? It's because physically speaking, the battery is going to be bigger, and it's not going to fit in the unit. All right. Even when it's the right size, the batteries don't want, the cover don't want to go back on. That's how it is. Now, since we are working with AC or alternating current, I am absolutely going to put it all back together before trying to turn it on. I don't want anything exposed or anything unavailable that wasn't exposed before. Because again, we're dealing with alternating current. You must be careful. So, I am not going to plug this into the wall. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it on. Because if I have it wired correctly, it should turn on and be sad because it's unplugged. There should be some charge in these batteries. These were brand new batteries, so usually there's at least a little bit of charge in them. Usually enough to turn the unit on. So, we're going to give it a go. We're going to see if this springs back to life for me here. It's alive! So, currently there's no load on this, and it's also not plugged in. Before I plug something into this, though, I'm actually going to shut it off and then connect it to an outlet. You never really want to pull a UPS unit directly from the wall to test it to see if the batteries work. Find the breaker in your panel, shut it off at the circuit. You don't want to remove ground from these because a part of, like I said earlier, over voltage protection, where's it going to send that over voltage? If you unplug it, well, now you've got a ground that's not grounded. Don't do that. It causes problems. So, I can see that it's on. The battery capacity shows it's pretty full. I do want to put a little bit of a load on it. Right now it says it's got 398 minutes. Well, nothing's plugged into it, so I would anticipate it to be pretty thoroughly happy about that. Okay, it's off. Good, good, good. So now the moment of truth. I'm going to plug it into the wall. I already know my outlet's good, which is good. Okay, so most units don't turn on automatically, and that's fine. Naturally, if the batteries do die in your unit, like say that you were in an extended outage, say you had a power outage, it was like over an hour, right, and the unit was going to run dry on batteries. With the USB plugged into your computer is going to detect the UPS as a battery, right? In Windows 10 and Windows 11, there are default drivers that will know that it's a battery, and then it'll apply a battery profile. I'm pretty sure what happens in default is it's after it's like 15 or 20 minutes running on battery, it puts the computer to sleep. But once you have your UPS connected, you can download the software that comes from the manufacturer. CyberPower actually has, that's what this guy is, a nice utility that allows you to configure everything on the unit, which frankly isn't a lot, but it does give you some statistics. And if the unit has gone into over voltage or under voltage protection, you can actually open up that little applet and see that the UPS is in the middle of doing something. Because if you're not physically in front of your computer, say you're remoted in from the office, or maybe this is your office computer, you can actually check and see if the UPS has intervened. Okay, so we got this guy. We're going to fire it back up now. Okay. So the lights are hopefully not too blurry. I'll read them to you here. We got load capacity on top. We've got battery capacity on bottom. And then there's the input, right? We can see that we've got normal, and it shows a little plug symbol, which means that we are plugged into an outlet. And if I look on the back, we're going to see that there's no wiring fault, and the unit's currently silent. If I rotate to the back, I can prove that. I've got no red light. I knew I wasn't going to have a red light. Why? Because I checked the outlet first. Case in point. Comes in handy. So, as I'd promised, surge and battery outlets. They're labeled. They're colored. Be really careful with that. When it's a larger unit UPS, you may find that there's no surge-only outlets and they're all battery outlets. Never assume when you're working with a UPS unit that they are all battery backup enabled. That will burn you. That will burn you real good. And something that I recommend when you're putting one of these in, get it all wired appropriately. Get your stuff in that you want to have on battery, plugged in on battery. Anything on surge you want on surge, and then go and trip the breaker. At which point now, go check your stuff. Is the stuff that's supposed to still be on actually on? If it is, we're looking pretty good. If it's not, you may have something plugged in the wrong place. And it's not the end of the world. Why? Because you tested it. And that saves everybody some time. Just a couple weeks ago, I actually pulled a UPS out of storage. I plugged it in. I checked it. The battery capacity said it was fantastic. I got it all wired appropriately. I went into the Cyber Power control panel and I clicked the self-test button. And you know what happened? The lights went out everywhere. It was a defective unit. We didn't know that, but I found out because I tested it beforehand. It made for quite a mess, but that's all sorts of excitement. All right. I am going to grab something to plug into this so we can see what it looks like when it switches to battery. So give me a brief moment while I grab something here. All right, I'm going Pixar style. I got a lamp. So, thing up my sleeve. I got a lamp. Big shock, I know. This is a fluorescent bulb that's rated at like 7 or 10 watts. So, I know for a fact, by that alone, I'm not going to overload the unit when it switches the battery. But it's enough to get the job done. So, I'm now going to trip the circuit that this UPS is plugged into. And we'll see if I lose my other lamp, because I don't actually remember what that's plugged into. Ready now? Okay, well, good news is my other lamp actually is plugged into something else. But I still have power here, and this unit is actually muted at the current moment, right? So if I pick this up, the lamp's plugged into surge and battery. And if we look at the face, we're going to see that we are running on battery. It says the battery symbol, letting you know that we're on battery, and that the alarm is silenced. If I actually tap the mute button, or maybe I have to hold it. There we go. Okay, alarm's turned back on. So now periodically it's going to beep. And it's going to be salty. Yes, okay. I'm not going to blare your ears here. I'm going to remute it. There we go. Okay, we're muted. We're still running on battery, though. And the nice thing is that we have a little display button, and we can actually cycle through a couple of the different statistics on the UPS. So as we can see right now, the capacity is right up top. It says our estimated runtime is about 400 minutes. And that's going down kind of fast. The nice thing is that when you have the capacity, the load capacity is how much wattage you are in relationship to your battery. This lamp doesn't pull a whole lot, so big shock. It doesn't even show up as a single bar on here. But if I click on the display button, I can see that my input is 0 volts at the outlet. I've got also the wave, or the hertz of the outlet, which is 0 because there's no power. I'm outputting 120 volts into my connected device at 60 hertz. which is the line rate of the electricity, or excuse me, the waveform. Hertz is the waveform. I believe that one's the waveform of the power. And output, yeah, it doesn't even show up on that. Kilowatt or volt amp. The amount of amps I'm using. These would all show things if I had an actual legitimate, like, fairly sized load in here. And we can actually see right here the battery capacity. So I'm at 89% battery capacity, which ain't too bad. So, with that, I'm actually going to switch this back on, and I'm actually going to show you what those other numbers look like. Okay, you may or may not have heard it, but the UPS made a click. And what that click was it switching from battery back over to line voltage. So, if I click the little display button, I cycle through here, we're outputting 117 volts. Why is that not 120? Well, I'm back on line voltage. 117 is within the acceptable range where the UPS will not intervene. That means that's what's coming into my outlet, 117 volts from the street. I don't believe there's really nothing else to see here. Are we on the other screens? Oh yeah, so then naturally with the battery capacity, it's plugged in and it's charging now. And that's our estimated runtime, but again, you get the point. Okay, so I've now got a little bit of a project on my hands because I've got lead acid batteries. Well, those can't go in the normal trash here in America. Those have to be recycled at an appropriate facility. Check with your local peeps, and you can generally find some information on how to properly dispose of said batteries. In the United States, there are quite a few vendors that recycle batteries that generally sells the UPS units. So big box stores like Staples does it. Best Buy used to do it, but that's kind of based on the locale. It's very location based. So if you do have a unit and you do need to change out the batteries, it does behoove you to see where you can get rid of them. Now, the particular vendor that I bought these batteries from, they did include some paperwork that I could actually fill out the paperwork, put the used batteries in the box, and then pay the postage to make them go away. They're still appropriately disposed of, and then they're out of my hair. Now, granted, I have a local place I can just go get rid of these, and then it's safely disposed of. Because the last thing you want is you don't want lead acid batteries leaking and mixing with groundwater. That's no good. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for the people who live in the environment. Like I'm one of the nerds that live in the environment. I would prefer my drinking water to not be full of lead or acid. But that's me. I don't know about you. I mean, yes, I am a protogen, but I mean, I'm not exactly waterproof. So, yeah, there's that. Yes, it's a bad joke. I know. I'm not sorry. All right. So, I would like to ask if there are any questions from the peeps that are chilling in the stream. Ha. Okay. So, with that being the case, let me see who is online. Let's see here. All right, here's the $1,000,000 question. Can I type their name? We're about to find out. Okay, and with that, I wish you all a pleasant evening. Bye-bye.